A longtime confidant, close friend of Professor Dershowitz. Danny is an amazing guy in his own right. Besides being Mr. Dershowitz's point of contact in the land of Israel, he is a former student of the professor. He is a real treasure to both the American and the Israeli Air Force as a fighter pilot, having multiple successful missions, including a mission to Iraq. Maybe he'll tell us more about that. He is also one of the founders of Space IL. He's on the Israel baseball management team. He is a phenomenal friend of mine, a tremendous baker of brownies. Danny, the stage is yours.
It's really a great honor to be here tonight and to have this wonderful thing. And I know you didn't come to hear me or hear anybody else, but before we do this, what I would like to acknowledge is one of the people who helped this evening happen. Besides, of course, Jay, the evening is sponsored by the Zionist Organization of America, and everybody knows that there's an election going on in Israel today, right? And they know that there's also Super Tuesday, there are Democratic primaries, and there's an election in America coming up soon. But what most of the people probably don't know is that there's an election going on which is probably just as important for the Jewish people. And that election is taking place even as we speak. It started about 10 days ago. It's going to go about another 10 days. And to tell you about that election and why it's so important, Elon, I'm glad to invite our colleague and co-sponsor for the evening tonight.
Thank you, Danny. It's really a privilege to be able to speak to all of you this evening. I see a lot of familiar faces as well in the audience. And it's a great honor to be able to speak to the presence of one of the greatest Jewish minds in the United States today, Mr. Alan Dershowitz. Round of applause for sure. I'd like to thank also the Deputy Chairman of the World Zionist Organization, Yaakov Haguel, and his entire team, as well as the Tel Aviv International Salon. As Danny said, my name is Elon Pomerantz. I'm an Ole, like many of you here. And for whoever isn't and is eligible, you'll never make a better decision in your life than to become one. As perhaps that statement indicates, Zionism is something that burns within me. It has colored my life and guided my path since as long as I can remember. That same fervor, that eternal, embedded magnetism of our people to our land was present in the early spring of 1897 at what would become the first national political organization of the nation of Israel in over 1,800 years. That spring at the First World Zionist Congress, Theodor Herzl laid the foundation for the Zionist organization, later the World Zionist Organization, and the beginning of the redemption of our long exiled and endlessly persecuted ancestors. As foretold in the books of our prophets, a Redeemer of Israel had arrived and his call for action was taken up. Today, the World Zionist Congress, the legislature of the World Zionist Organization, is the parliament of a proud and strong Jewish people. It affords our diaspora, many of you former members of it, the privilege to vote for representatives and help determine our future as a free nation in our homeland. Kol Yisrael arevim ze lezeh. All Israel is a guarantor for one another. Therefore, I implore you to do your part and vote for the leading Zionist ticket in the current elections for the World Zionist Congress, Slate 11, led by the Zionist Organization of America, and joined by 26 other strong, pro-Israel, proudly Zionist groups. The ZOA is the tip of the spear in pro-Israel and Zionist activity and advocacy in the United States. A strong ZOA is absolutely essential to ensure critical issues to our people and our one and only state are addressed. Essential policies such as our eternal capital, Jerusalem, remaining undivided, strengthening Jewish identity, and combating the scourge of BDS and the rampant anti-Semitism we see around the globe. It will only be possible to do these things if ZOA and Slate 11 get your vote. It is as easy as taking out your smartphone and opening votezoa.org. I urge you all, with a bit of Israeli chutzpah, which I have acquired over the years, to vote even here, right now. It takes only a minute or two and a few short steps. We need your vote. Israel needs your vote. As a nation, we are at historic crossroads yet again, both at home and abroad, and strengthening actively pro-Zionist and pro-Israel policies and representatives is key. Vote ZOA, Toda, thank you, and always, remember, feel pride in your history, your forefathers, and your heritage. They are unparalleled and unprecedented anywhere in the world. Erev Tov.
Thank you. All right, so now I'm going to take my jacket off because now we're starting up. Now we're really getting going. I'll take it down in a second here. Also, that has the Space IL pin and everything. So first of all, are you guys excited about seeing Alan Dershowitz? There you go. So let's give it up here. We're going to bring Alan out to the stage in 1 second. I'm only going to mention one story. I was a student during the 1995-96 year when I was a Wexner Fellow at Harvard, and that was the year that Rabin, unfortunately, was shot, and a lot of things happened that year. But that Yom Kippur was, of course, Erev Yom Kippur was the day that the OJ verdict came down, and I was actually with Alan as the Israeli, student there, taking Crim Law 101, sitting in on his classes. But he liked me, the Jewish fighter pilot, from Israel, the son of a rabbi, grandson of a rabbi, and he calls me in before class one day, and he says, could we have final arguments on Rosh Hashanah? And I said, well, the trial's being held in California. You should go by the Koufax principle. On a day when Koufax would pitch, you're allowed to have court. On a day when you don't pitch, meaning Yom Kippur, you can't. And I was joking, but it took me seriously. He thought it was a brilliant idea. So you always got to be careful if you're joking around. And of course, I remember also then later on, after, I remember he got a phone call from Barry Scheck, of course, the forensic expert, and Alan says, okay, what's up? You see, we got the labs back about OJ's blood. Okay, give it to me. Ooh. OJ, listen, we just got the labs back, and I got good news and bad news. And OJ says, hey, Alan, I'm a tough guy. I'm a football player. I can take the bad news. Give me the bad news first. So I said, okay, well, the blood on the glove, the knife, and all that stuff, your blood, you're the killer. No doubt about it. OJ goes, oh, my God. What's the good news? He goes, well, your cholesterol's only 120. So that's apocryphal, obviously. But Alan, by the way, had he not gone into law, would have been a stand-up comic. So I'm going to call Alan out right now. Alan, do you want to come out?
Thank you, Danny. Thank you.
So the first thing I'm going to do, for those people who know, I was involved in Space IL from day one, and we did make it to the moon. That was successful. But now I've been actually doing an even more improbable thing. Is Peter here? Peter Kurtz. Peter Kurtz is the general manager of Team Israel, who has built this team, which qualified for the Olympics, and there will be the first time ever an Israeli team sport in 44 years.
Baseball.
Yeah, first time ever a baseball team, and we're going to be playing there. And so for the Team Israel going to Japan, Alan, I'm going to ask you to take your jacket off here. Put this on. By the way, those people who don't know, you don't want to play with him one-on-one basketball, or horse, he'll kill you. Okay, right? Great athlete.
Well, thank you so much. I did play basketball in high school in Madison Square Garden, and I guarded a guy named Ralphie Lipschitz. Have you ever heard of him? Yes, you have. You've bought his clothing. He became Ralph Lauren. He was a lousy ball player, but he really dressed well. So. Thank you, Danny. I'm going to be rooting for the Israel team.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to be rooting for you, by the way. There's no doubt about it. So now I'm not going to introduce everybody here. By the way, when I did hear that on the panel we have Natasha Kirchhoff, actually with me, I actually helped produce a program called The One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz on ILTV for about 2 years, 100 programs. And I had really the good fortune to work with Natasha, who was the anchor for the news programs. And of course, she was the host of this program together with Alan. And so it was a terrific experience. So tonight we're going to do actually 3-on-1. Alan can hold his own against the 3 young people. But the idea was to have young people engage Alan Dershowitz, because the question is always going to be, what are you people? Look to your left, look to your right. Those are the people who are going to be Alan Dershowitz's of the next generation. It's up to you guys. So Alan's going to give you a start tonight. So with that, I'll just say a few words about Natasha, and then we'll go and she'll introduce everybody else, and I'll hand the podium over to her. So first of all, Natasha is a graduate of Duke University. That's also a basketball, kingdom there, and absolutely. And she has both Argentinian and New York blood. She has plenty of attitude. And she's been living here in Israel. But her husband, without giving too much of a plug, has the best fast food gourmet restaurant in Israel. Sunrun. There you go, get a free plug. And but together, now I'm really disappointed too, because they told me together with her we were going to have Brody and MJ. So I thought the night was going to be about basketball. But so I'll let Natasha introduce MJ and Brody, and then of course Alan. Please, Natasha.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm going to use this mic because this one is for the live. Actually, can we put that in front of you, Alan?
Sure.
So this is actually being live broadcasted right now. You can put that actually on the table in front of you because you're going to be using the other mic when you're speaking. Just turn around towards him. All right, everybody. So as you know, I'm Natasha Kirchuk. First of all, it's election days. Who voted? Can we get some hands? Okay. Why is this not a full crowd? That's it? Raise your hands again. Let's see that. Okay, well, they do say that the voter turnout was higher than in the April elections and in the September elections, so I guess a third round of elections is good for something, right? All right, so thank you for joining us tonight for Alan Dershowitz Seeing 2020. And we want to give you guys a chance to ask your own questions. That's what we're going to be doing today. Of course, Professor Dershowitz is one of America's greatest legal minds. He's a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. And he arrives to us fresh off of his presentation at the U.S. Senate impeachment trial of President Donald Trump, which I'm sure somebody here is going to have a question about, right? Okay. All right, now before I officially introduce you guys, there are some more details that we have to share with the crowd here. I'd like to introduce. I might interview you guys a little bit after this. Our panelists, we have Dr. Jane Kronfeld, otherwise known as MJ. She's a researcher, she's a university lecturer, she's a journalist as well. She's spoken at the United Nations, the White House, and on Capitol Hill. In 2014, she actually launched Passion for a Purpose. It is a full-service social impact and philanthropic development agency, and today she's working full-time on a documentary project. Very interesting. It's featuring testimonies from residents of Judea and Samaria, and a book about terrorism featuring testimonies of survivors from around the world. So that's MJ, guys. Give her a round of applause. All right. We also have Rabbi Dr. Shlomo Brody. He is a program director for the Tikva Fund, a columnist for Jerusalem Post, and a research fellow at Bar-Ilan University Law School. He publishes widely in Israel and abroad on public policy debates. And his first book, guys, called A Guide to the Complex won a National Jewish Book Award, so you should check that out. Round of applause for him. All right, now, Alan, my next victim. Turning back to you. So I'd like to give some actually fun tidbits about Alan before we get to kind of the real meat of tonight's event. We've worked together for quite some time, so I've learned a lot about you. I think that's fair to say. Alan has published, now Danny told me this, around 45 books. Is that the correct, what's the exact number? Because they just keep on growing.
45.
45. All right, 45.
This is number 45.
That's number 45. Can you turn that to the crowd so you can see that in the light? That's defending the Constitution. So you guys might be able to guess what that's about. But in the last year alone, I think you also published 2 other books, right? So you keep busy, Alan. Alan became the youngest tenured law professor in history at the age of 29 at Harvard University. That's not a big deal at all. We shouldn't feel pressured or anything about what we're doing with our lives. He's known for his involvement in some of the most high-profile legal cases. Danny mentioned them, including O.J. Simpson, Mike Tyson, Nathan Sharansky. I can go on, but I'm not going to go on because I want Alan to speak. But most importantly, and this is really just the most important detail, Professor Dershowitz hails from Brooklyn, New York. Is there anybody from Brooklyn, New York here? Okay. All right, good. That's good news. So that's where his love for the Brooklyn Dodgers and baseball comes from. He actually grew up in the same neighborhood as Sandy Koufax. facts. That's a fun fact. And he loves singing and klezmer music, even sang in a children's choir, right? You did. And I don't think you're going to be singing for us tonight, are you?
Not if you're lucky.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see where this goes. I mean, it is the third election in 11 months, so things are a bit crazy. But at least you can get your 2 cents on where the state of Israel is heading, and the United States as well. So with that, thank you so much for joining us, Professor Dershowitz. How are you doing tonight? That's the first question.
Whenever I'm in Israel, I'm doing just great. And to be in Israel on a historic night like this, it's just a treasure and a pleasure, and I hope everybody votes. If anybody here has not voted, please leave, go and vote. I won't start until you come back.
Yeah, actually you have until 10 p.m., so an hour and a half, guys. Keep that in mind. And your daughter was supposed to be here with you, but that was kind of...
My daughter and her boyfriend was supposed to be here. That was the reason we came here, to show her boyfriend Israel, but she got kept out of the country because she and her boyfriend were in Singapore. What we didn't know is that the reason they wanted to come to Israel specially is because he wanted to propose to her in Israel. And instead he had to propose to her in Santorini 2 nights ago. Very romantic. And so we're going to meet them in Turkey tomorrow, and we have the ring. So it's not official until we carry that ring and it's placed on her finger. So I accept your collective mazel tov. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm bringing them back here in a couple of months when the virus is gone and when everybody can come here. We haven't figured that out yet.
We can wait. We can wait. All right, guys. So let's talk a little bit about how this is going to work tonight, just to give some clarity to the audience. We have a wonderful panel up here, like I said. They have some pressing questions of their own, and we're even going to have a lightning round of groundbreaking questions for you, Alex. Get ready for that. And then we're going to open the floor to questions from the crowd as well. But I'd actually like to ask you 1 or 2 questions before we get started.
Sure.
You can keep the answer short, but we're all listening closely because we want to give you the chance to say told you so at the end of this election ordeal. All right, so what do you predict is going to be the outcome of tonight's election? So it's going to be the next Prime Minister of Israel, in your opinion.
The Talmud said that prophecy ended with the destruction of the Second Temple. And anyone who tries to prophesy is either a knave or a fool. Anybody who tries to prophesy the outcome of an Israeli election is a double knave and fool. And anybody who's an American who tries to do that wins the Triple Crown. So there's no way I'm going to make any prediction. I have a hope, which I know many of you share because you applauded when somebody previously said it. I hope it's the last election, at least this year. And
you think it's going to be the last election?
It's impossible to know, and I hope so. My fear is that there's such a desperate attempt to not have another election that all kind of wheeling and dealing will occur behind the scenes, and we won't even know about most of it. And democracy lives in the sunshine, as Justice Brandeis once said. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. It's a good disinfectant for viruses and also for politics.
All right, so we don't have any clear answer
No clear
there.
answer. You have a clear answer. There is no clear answer.
Oh,
That's the clear answer.
there you go,
Okay.
guys. Okay, all right, that's fair. I was going to ask you, you've been a Democrat for the last 50 years.
All my life.
All
I've
your
never
life.
voted Republican in my life. Yeah.
But you also defended Trump in the impeachment
I did.
trial. Are you switching allegiances, and who do you think is going to be the Democrat candidate, and who will win the election?
Well, it's so interesting because I would say 20 years ago, I would have said that question can only come from an Israeli, not an American. Because in America, it's expected. If you're a liberal Democrat, you will represent people you fundamentally disagree with. Early in my career, I defended the rights of Nazis to march through Skokie, Illinois, a Jewish neighborhood with Holocaust survivors. I defended the rights of communists to teach, even though I'm virulent anti-communist. So it would have been the most natural thing in the world for me to represent somebody who I voted against. Not so much in Israel, where lawyers tend to represent mostly people who they support ideologically and politically. But I can't give you that answer anymore because in America the same thing's happened. We have adopted the worst of the Israeli system in America, and today I am a pariah among the left and among Democrats because I'm representing, and I represented Donald Trump, even though I disagree with him. In my speech for 70 minutes in the United States Senate, there was one word I never mentioned: Trump. I never mentioned him because I was defending the Constitution. I was opposing the use of impeachment as a weaponized partisan attempt to remove a duly elected president. And so today in America, you have to pick sides. And if you try to say, I'm a liberal Democrat, I'm going to vote for liberal Democrats except for Sanders, I will not vote for Sanders under any circumstances. But I defend Donald Trump. Relatives, friends, people whose kids I helped get into college will not talk to me. And here's the interesting point. The original title for my book, I wrote a book called The Case Against Impeaching Trump. The original title for the book was The Case Against Impeaching Hillary Clinton, because I started to write it in August of 2016 when it was clear she was going to be the next president, and the Republicans said, the day she is sworn in is the day we start to impeach her. And so I started to write a book against the weaponization of impeachment. If that had happened, they would be building statues to me in Martha's Vineyard. I'd be invited to every left-wing event. I mean, the good thing is I've lost 10 pounds on what I call the Trump diet because nobody invites me to dinner anymore. But we've moved away from the classic civil liberties position where you defend anybody or everybody's entitled to a defense to the Israeli system, which is not a good system, where ideological considerations determine who lawyers represent. So, you know, that's the reality in America. You had another question buried in there somewhere.
Yeah. Who's going to win the election?
Well, it's impossible to tell. Tomorrow night, U.S. time at about this time, we'll have a much better sense because of Super Tuesday. I do think it's likely to be a primary between Sanders and Biden, which is a very interesting one because it's very ideological. Sanders is very hard left, and Biden is kind of center left. To make an analogy about something I know nothing about, and you'll all correct me, ideologically between Netanyahu and Gantz, it's probably right, center right. In the United States, in the Democratic Party, it's left, center, left. And I think, here I'll make a prediction. I know a little bit about American politics. If Biden continues to win as he did in South Carolina, and if his debate performance upticks a little bit, and if some of the other moderates like Klobuchar and maybe Bloomberg drop out, and it's a head-to-head against Sanders versus Biden, I think Biden may win. And a Biden and Klobuchar ticket would be quite a strong ticket and a pro-Israel ticket. Those are the only two candidates among the Democrats who have said anything positive about Israel. Even Bloomberg, who will speak at AIPAC today, I gather, when he was asked about Sanders' statements, he gave muddled, fuddled answers. He didn't know what he was talking about. He seemed like he was just punting, and everybody was very disappointed. So then you have to ask me, head-on election, let's assume it's either Biden or Sanders against President Trump, and nobody can predict that one. It will turn on turnout. The chances of the Democrats being better this time are greater because of the demographics. There are more young people, there are more Latino people, there are more African American voters, and they tend to be against Trump. So it's not a lock who will get elected, and there's one possibility that Trump's fortunes have been diminished and reversed by something nobody could have predicted and beyond his control, namely the virus, which has driven down the stock market. Last I looked, it was up a little today, but driven it down. And if we go into a deep recession, one of Trump's major campaign issues, how the market is done, will be less effective as a campaign mantra for him. So stay tuned.
All right. Okay, so I know there are a million questions right now that you guys have on it, right? Okay, but first I'd like to hand the mic over to MJ, okay? Because I'd like you guys to have a chance to answer some questions
Sure.
before we turn to the floor here.
Well, thank you, Professor Dershowitz, for
Thank
being
you.
part of our special evening.
Oh, such a pleasure to be
Yeah,
here.
thank you. So looking back at your entire life and career, there's one thing about you: you've never been defined by your criticisms that have been lobbied against you. You've never been defined by the failures that you've undergone, which are very few and far between. But I'm curious, what do you look at personally as your one very serious professional failure, and how did it affect you both as an attorney and as a human being?
Oh, it's clear, and that was meeting Jeffrey Epstein. I was introduced to him. You probably all know who he is. He was, according to media reports, one of the worst abusers of young women. I was introduced to him by the Lady Rothschild, the wife of the Lord Rothschild, very active in Zionist causes. They told me he was this wonderful philanthropist who contributed massively to Harvard. I should meet him, and I did. And he conducted seminars at Harvard, and I went to those seminars. We never had a personal friendship. I didn't know his relatives. He didn't know my family. It wasn't a personal. And I never had any idea that he was engaged in any of these kinds of activities. He always had very attractive young women in their late 20s and 30s around him, but nobody ever saw him in the presence of a teenager. And then he got arrested, and he asked me to represent him, and I represented him and ended up very successfully representing him, which was the big problem. Nobody wants you to successfully represent somebody who's so terrible. When I first took the OJ case, everybody said, oh, it's great, OJ should have a lawyer. When we won, everybody hated me. This was 10 times worse. And then a woman who I never met, never heard of, accused me of having sex with her. When my wife heard about it, she laughed hysterically. And especially, I joked about it. I mean, I'm the most, I don't touch anybody, I don't hug, I'm not Al Franken, I am a totally faithful guy. Since the day I met Jeffrey Epstein, I've touched one woman, my wife. So it was absurd. But then came the Me Too movement, and the accusation stuck. We found emails from her which admitted she never met me. We found a tape recording by her lawyer in which he admits she couldn't have been in the places she said she met me, and that she's wrong, simply wrong. We submitted it to the former director of the FBI, who did a complete, thorough investigation and said she made it up. People still believe it. And now that I've represented President Trump, now people on the left want to believe it. And so that's probably been the worst thing that's happened to me professionally, and I'm fighting it. I'm suing her for defamation. She's suing me. I'm suing her lawyer. She's suing my lawyer. I've had to pay over $1 million in legal bills. In the end, we'll win because we have all the evidence on our side. But with the Me Too movement, you can't win. I support the Me Too movement. I think it's very important for young women any woman who have been abused to hold to account the people who have abused them. But I think it was Eric Hoffa, the philosopher, who once said, every cause starts as a movement, then it becomes a business, then a racket. And I want to stop Me Too from becoming a racket. Lawyers today, exploitive lawyers, use the Me Too movement to extort money from people. I won't pay a penny. I'm going to fight to the end because I have nothing to hide. Most people have something to hide. I have nothing to hide. So I will fight to the end. But it's obviously taken a toll on me, on my health, on my wife, on my family. And so it's the one regret. I don't know what I could have done differently. I don't regret having represented him because that's my job. I regret having met him. I regret that he was in my life. Actually, of course, I wrote a book about it. I write a book about everything. And so I wrote a book when I was accused called Guilt by Accusation, The Challenge of Proving Innocence in the Age of Me Too, where I lay out the entire case. I have all the emails, I have the tape recording, I have the FBI investigation. Everybody who's read it says it's an open and shut case, but not not that many people read any book, even if this is a bestseller, but still, I would say that a large percentage of Americans think that where there's smoke, there's fire, and therefore I must have done something wrong. And so that's a legacy that, I don't mind defending myself against anything I did, but the idea of having to defend yourself against something not only you didn't do, but you find appalling and revolting and just disgusting that anybody would do what I was accused of doing. But, some people think sexual assault is so heinous that even innocence should not be a defense. And when you think about that, of course innocence should always be a defense. And so I'm going to fight this. I'm going to still support Me Too, but I'm going to fight against the abuses of Me Too. And by the way, I'm happy to talk about it because I'm a victim, and victims should speak out. Whether you're a victim of sexual abuse or a victim of a false accusation, victims should speak out.
Professor Dershowitz.
Yeah, there you go.
Professor Dershowitz, you were directly involved in one of the issues that hovered over the Israeli election campaign, or I should say campaigns, namely the indictment of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Right. And you were very outspoken with cases 2000 and 4000. They represent, I think, quote here, the weaponization of the criminal justice for political purposes and present a danger to the freedom of the press. Mm-hmm. Can you explain why, in your view, favorable press coverage cannot constitute a bribe, even if in return the politician will support advantageous legislation for the other party?
Okay, the best answer to the question is for me to ask you all a question. If tomorrow or next week somebody introduced a law in the Knesset making it a crime for any member of the Knesset to seek positive media coverage in exchange for voting a certain way on legislation, how many votes out of 120 do you think it would get in the Knesset? And if you say one, you're wrong by one. It would not get a single vote because every member of the Knesset has done that. My best proof, when the Yediot Ahronot issue came up, I wrote a piece in favor of the constitutional right of Yisrael Hayom to distribute his newspapers free. And there was legislation pending, and 43 members of the Knesset voted in favor of Yediot Ahronot. All of them got positive coverage. And all of those who voted against it got negative coverage. When a person gets elected to the Knesset or the American Congress, who is the first person they hire? Press secretary. Who's the second person they hire? Political consultant and pollster. The third person might be somebody to help them with the legislation. But every politician wants positive coverage. And the idea of making positive coverage a criminal quo for quid pro quo is so dangerous to freedom of the press, so dangerous to democracy, that no other country in the world has ever done it. Now, Israel is an innovator, and it should innovate in technology, but it should not be the first Western democracy to criminalize the seeking of positive media coverage. If they want to make it a crime to help people with legislation, that would be one thing. But to put the quo on it on the other side as seeking media positive coverage or the end of negative media coverage, I think is such a danger to democracy, which is why I have written what I've written. And of course, like in America, in this country you have to pick sides. If you do anything that's pro-Netanyahu, you're perceived as anti the other side, and vice versa. And I take no position on political issues in Israel. I'm not going to tell you who I would vote for if I were an Israeli. And yet, because I'm defending the right of a prime minister, and no matter who the prime minister was, I would be taking the same position. I've been attacked pretty ferociously, including by the head of the reform movement in America, who said I must be doing it for the money, which is almost an anti-Semitic trope. You're a Jew, you must be doing it for the money. Of course, I don't get a penny, and I would never accept a penny. I do this out of principle. But I have very strong feelings about this. I am not making the moral case for anything that anybody has done I'm arguing that legally it is extremely dangerous. Now look, if you want to create crimes, be clear. If you want to make it a crime to accept a lot of cigars and a lot of champagne, what you do is you pass a statute that says any prime minister who accepts more than $1,000, 3,000 shekels worth of anything is automatically guilty of a crime. I support that. But don't give the prosecutor and the court the right to say how much is too much. That gives too much power to the legislature, too much power to the courts, too much power to prosecutors. And so, for me, the test is always, would the Knesset pass such a law? And if the answer is they wouldn't, prosecutors don't have the power to make it up as they go along. And courts don't have the power to make it up as they go along.
You were present when President Trump, I think, released his deal of the century.
Right.
Do you support this proposed resolution? And assuming the Palestinian leadership continues to reject it, would it be legitimate or wise for Israel to unilaterally annex the territories promised to it under this plan?
Boy, whoever said there would be easy questions? Wow, it's a great question. I did more than being present at the unveiling of the plan. I actually worked on the plan. I went to the White House for 2 days and worked closely with Jared Kushner and Avi Berkowitz and Jason Greenblatt and people from the State Department. I discussed the plan with many, many, many people. I had some input, a small amount, into some details of the plan. I had some opposition to the draft I saw. They made some changes. It's a very good beginning for a negotiation. This is not the plan that will ultimately be accepted if the Palestinians sit down and negotiate. There are many things in it that are subject to negotiation. Let me give you an example. Israel wants to maintain military control over the Jordan Valley. That's understandable, but does the control have to constitute sovereignty? Or could it be a 100-year lease or a 50-year lease? Could it constitute some other kind of arrangement? We don't know the answer to that. We don't know what the red line is for Israel on the Jordan Valley. We know this is a negotiating position. The same thing is true about Jerusalem. Whether or not the capital will be in a suburb of Jerusalem or it can be moved 1,000 yards in a little bit so it will be part of Jerusalem. I think everybody knows the bottom line is there'll never again be a divided Jerusalem. But could there be an undivided Jerusalem, which would be a little bit more amenable to the Palestinian side? I don't know the answer. We may never know the answer because the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. I can tell you one thing I strongly support, and that is every time the Palestinians reject an offer, the next offer should be worse, not better. They should never be incentivized, which is why I disagreed with my friend Ehud Olmert's plan, because I thought Ehud Olmert's plan was more generous to the Palestinian than the ones rejected by Ehud Barak and Bill Clinton. And once the Palestinians rejected what was a very good plan, 2000, 2001, they shouldn't have gotten a better plan. Because then they're going to reject it and expect yet another plan. So I'm very happy that this plan gives them less than what they would have gotten had they accepted any of the earlier plans. When you think about, oh my God, they're going to get a small state that won't be exactly contiguous at all points. Think about what the Jewish Agency accepted in 1947. They accepted 1937 first, 38, and then 1947, the division of the United Nations. It was putting aside the Negev, which no one wanted except Ben-Gurion, the amount of land Israel got, certainly from the Peel Commission, which they accepted, was non-contiguous, kind of little coastal dots that looked like an old Karen Kayemet box, which had the settlements scattered alongside. And what Ben-Gurion said is, give me a state. Give us a state. We'll build on it. And I heard the other day from a Palestinian, how dare you offer us a piece of wasteland in the Negev desert in exchange for the settlement blocks? A piece of wasteland? Would David Ben-Gurion have described that as a piece of wasteland? They're getting $50 billion to turn that piece of wasteland into Beersheba, into other beautiful places In the Negev, I had only one day of vacation this trip. It was the most wonderful day. I went to Breshit, the hotel in the Ramon crater. What a magnificent place. Wasteland. But look at what was done with it. So if the Palestinians reject this plan, then the question comes up, what are Israel's options? One option Israel does not have is the one-state solution. That is to maintain control over 3 or 4 million Palestinians who would then be without sovereignty of their own state, without voting rights in Israel, without full citizenships. That is not an acceptable alternative. So the acceptable alternatives are one that Prime Minister Sharon adopted. And a month before his death, he told me that he was, before his stroke, I'm sorry, he told me he was planning to extend his unilateral withdrawal from Gaza to parts of the West Bank. What Sharon's idea was, and he expressed it to me very articulately, he said, don't ever ask the Palestinians to say yes to anything, just give it to them. Because saying yes is harder than taking it and working with it. So his psychological idea was to give the Palestinians the Gaza Strip, leave all the hothouses and the farm implements. It could have been Singapore on the Mediterranean without the virus. It could have been a beautiful, beautiful place, and instead they turned their hothouses and farm implements into rockets. They got rid of the Palestinian Authority. They killed many of the members. Hamas took over, and it's become a battleship, not a state, not an area. What he was planning to do was do the same thing in parts of the West Bank, gradually. I don't think it worked with the Gaza. I think in the end, most Israelis and most Zionists think, in retrospect, it was a mistake to allow a Palestinian, a Hamas enclave without a military presence that the people of Sderot have to live through, and they are the ones who bear the brunt of it. And by the way, many of the people of Sderot are opposed to this plan because they don't want the area right below Sderot to be the Palestinian area. Again, they say they're in the target area. So these are complicated issues. I do not think the United States will recognize unilateral annexation of the settlement blocks and the Jordan Valley. That is, I don't think the United States would allow unilateral annexation of what the plan permits Israel to do in exchange for giving the Palestinians many things. I think President Trump has at least suggested that that would not be something the United States wanted. So, don't know what's going to happen. The Palestinians are going to be pressured by the Emirates, by the Gulf nations. I think they're going to be pressured somewhat by the Egyptians and by the Jordanians, and I think that's the theory. The theory was never the Palestinians would say, yes, we accept, or yes, we'll negotiate, but that they may be pressured to do so. Remember one reality, and this is a very important reality, and you're not going to like when I say it. There are only two groups of people who give a damn about the Palestinians, and that is the Palestinians and the Israelis, and not necessarily in that order. The Israelis care deeply about the Palestinians. You get more sensitivity and concern for the actual situation of Palestinians in Israel than you do among many of the Palestinian leaders, and certainly than you do on university campuses, in the Gulf states. The university campuses, they're not pro-Palestine. They're anti-Israel. Let's be very clear about that. What's the best proof of that? The best proof is that they couldn't care less about the Kurds. They never heard of the Kurds. If the Kurds were only lucky enough to be, quote, oppressed by Jews, they would be the leading cause on university campuses around the world. If the Palestinians were being oppressed by the Turks, the Syrians, the Iraqis, and the Iranians, nobody would have heard of the Palestinians. So it's not about Palestine. It's not about the Palestinians. It is about Israel. It is about the fact that Israel exists. And it's not what Israel does, it's what Israel is. That's what the hard left on American campuses and many of the people in Europe care about. And so it's very important to the Palestinians to understand their cause, although it's highlighted on university campuses today, is on the way down, not on the way up, as a major source of concern in the world. This is a unique opportunity to sit down and negotiate. I can tell you because I've spoken to leaders of Arab countries in the Gulf area and other places. They are sick and tired of the Palestinian whining, their unwillingness to compromise, their unwillingness to sit down and come to the table, and they are not going to be able to be there forever. I mean, many of these Arab Sunni states quietly support this plan because they want any plan. They just want to get this issue resolved. They now realize Israel is not a destabilizing force in the Middle East. It is a force for stability in the Middle East and a force that stands up against the destabilizing effects of Iran and the various terrorist organizations.
All right. Okay, so, mic drop.
Yeah.
All right, so MJ has a quick lightning round of questions.
Oh, sure.
We're gonna, I guess, make things a little bit lighter, probably for a very short amount of time. Can we open the floor to questions? So MJ, you have your questions. You can answer with either one word or one sentence.
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
Okay. So if you could define Israel in one word, what would that word be? One word.
Innovation.
Okay. If you could describe Israelis in one word, what would that word be?
Chutzpah.
Best prime minister ever, with the exception of Bibi.
Ben Gurion.
Okay. Most interesting person you ever met.
In the world?
Yeah.
Ever?
Ever.
I would say Natan Sharansky has to be very high on that list. I was so privileged to represent him when he was in the Russian prison. He is remarkable, and he increases his remarkability as he gets older.
He does. Most terrible person you ever met.
Oh.
Come on.
No,
There are worse. There are worse.
Oh, God. Who have I met? It's been so terrible. I guess the most destructively terrible person I've met and knew quite well is Noam Chomsky.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You recently stood on the Senate floor during the impeachment trial of the president. You stood on the Senate floor during the impeachment trial of the president. Can you name one senator that you caught napping during your oral argument?
I can tell you that 3 or 4 senators came to me afterward and said, "Thank you for keeping us up."
Okay.
So nobody naps during my speeches. You can call me many names, but boring is not one of them.
Well, I can tell you, even though we were 7 hours ahead, I stayed up and eagerly awaited for you to go on stage. The best famous student you ever had, with the exception of the best famous student you ever had, with the exception of our mutual friend Ted Cruz, who you named in the past as one of your best.
Well, I think Danny Grossman certainly has to qualify. I mean, he came to the class as a Top Gun American pilot, Israeli pilot. He wrote a brilliant paper on how to stop terrorism without diminishing civil liberties. I have been blessed. I had 10,000 students. And interesting, after the speech that I made, 2 of my students came over to me, and together, one of them was Mitt Romney, and he said, I really enjoyed your speech. I really thought it was influential, et cetera. He said he didn't vote with me, but he said, you gave me an A+. And Ted Cruz said, but you only gave me a B+. So, but Ted was right and Romney was wrong on the vote.
So the worst famous student that you ever had?
Oh, the worst famous.
So you failed somebody that we would know.
You can't fail anybody at Harvard. It's too hard. I mean, you'd have to work so hard to fail. To get a B, you don't even have to show up. Woody Allen once said, the secret of life is mostly just showing up. If you show up, you're going to get a B at Harvard. We have such great inflation. So who is my worst? There is a kid, you wouldn't know him. His name is Irons, Peter Irons. And he writes all these blogs, and he signs it, Dershowitz's worst student ever. So he has to qualify by self-admission.
Okay, so the Library of Alexandria is burning down, and we can only save one of the 45 Dershowitz books. Which book do we rescue for future generations, and why?
A book called Just Revenge, which is a novel I wrote based on what happened to my family
I read it.
during the Shoah. And it's based on a fantasy dream of mine as to what would happen if there were a legal case against the person who's now in his 80s who killed the whole family, and I was involved in that person's defense. It's my favorite.
It's beautiful. I
novel.
recommend it.
Yeah.
It's a novel, which is very interesting.
And the day it came out, a film producer called me at 1 in the morning and said, "I need to make a film of this." Unfortunately, his name was Harvey Weinstein.
So that actually brings me to the next question. Of the many portrayals of you on television and film, and possibly even the stage, I'm not sure, which performance is your favorite Alan Dershowitz?
Oh, I think it has to be Reversal of Fortune, the movie about the Mambulo case.
Okay.
Jeremy Irons won the
Yeah.
Oscar for that. And it's interesting. The guy who played me, when I saw a rough cut of the movie, I said, "You really got my professional life down pat. You watched my arguments, you saw my hand gestures, you know how I logically present my arguments, but you didn't really get my personal life down." He said, "Alan, nobody gives a damn about your personal life. This is a movie about your professional life." So
Well,
he did get that pretty well.
Well, that's funny. Everyone I asked said the same thing when I was polling these questions. So the next question is, do you now think OJ really did it?
So I'll tell you a story. I got this. I can't answer this in one word. You will love the story. So it's 1996, and it's the first year of the many year term of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He just got elected. I was here in Israel with my wife and daughter. I was writing a book called The Genesis of Justice, my midrash on the book of Bereshit. And Bibi invites me to his office, Erev Shabbat, Friday about 5. He said, nobody's there. We'll schmooze, we'll take some pictures. So we do that, and then he says, "Alan, come with me into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies, the little office that is totally secure. There's always a question I've wanted to ask you." He said, "Alan, did OJ do it?" I said, "Mr. Prime Minister, there's always a question I wanted to ask you. Does Israel have nuclear weapons?" He said, "Alan, you know I can't answer that." I said, "Mr. Prime Minister, you know I can't answer that." So if I couldn't answer the Prime Minister, I can't answer this.
So if you could meet only one Jew, historical, biblical, living or dead, who would you meet and what would you ask them?
If I could do that, I would be a Jew who lived in the early days of the Second World War, and I would have devoted my life to persuading Franklin Delano Roosevelt to get into the war earlier, to bomb the rail lines to Auschwitz. I regret not having been alive during that period when maybe I could have contributed just a tiny bit. The greatest praise ever given to me was given to me by my dear friend Elie Wiesel when he presented me with an award and said, if there had been a few Alan Dershowitzes during the 1930s and 40s, the history of world jewelry might have been different. It was way overstated, and I don't think it's accurate, but what a compliment, and how hard to live up to that. And so that would be who I want to be. Second to that, probably Dreyfus's lawyer.
Okay.
That would have been good too.
So the last two questions. What is the best part about being Alan Dershowitz?
You get up every morning and you say, there's going to be a real adventure today. I don't know what it is, but somebody's going to call me about representing him or her. Somebody is going to ask me to do something, and life will continue to be very, very exciting. I think that's the best part. The worst part is when people send you emails with members of your family on them, with targets on them, and threaten you and hate you for reasons that are unjustified. You know, when people come to me and they say, we used to admire you, now we don't, my standard answer is you were wrong for ever admiring me, because you have no idea what I'm about. The reason you admired me is by my principles, I defended people you approved of. Now, by the same principles, I'm defending people you disapprove of. You never should have admired me.
And so the last question, probably the most important of the evening that everyone here is wondering, when are you making Aliyah?
If I had 2 lives, one of them would be in Israel. I had a chance to do that. You may know this, but when Bibi first got elected, he and his then close friend Lieberman, who was then foreign minister, together invited me to become Israel's permanent representative to the United Nations. That would have required me to become an Israeli citizen. I thought about it. It would have been the greatest way, the greatest culmination of my career, to speak at the UN, truth to evil. I would have loved to do it, but I decided that as an American, it would send the wrong impression. Number one, it would send an impression of dual loyalty. Also, it would suggest that there was nobody qualified in Israel to be the ambassador to the UN. And in fact, when I turned it down, they picked Ron Persar, who ended up being a sensational ambassador to the UN, much better than I could have been, because he never loses his temper and gets angry. I probably would have been arrested for assault and battery at some point. So I'm glad. But I thought, you know, I've thought about Chatzi Aliyah, I've thought about buying a home here. It's a very important part of my life. This, my wife and I have calculated, is probably my 100th trip to Israel. I came here first in 1970, and what a way to begin. The first people I met were Golda Meir, Moshe Dayan, Shimon Peres. It was just the most remarkable trip. I came here to do a TV show called The Advocates, in which I interviewed all of these incredible people. I did not get to interview Ben Gurion. We wanted to, but it just didn't work out. I did see him make a speech in 1951 in New York, and of course, his wonderful wife Paula is from Brooklyn. So, but I think I will spend my life in the United States. My wife and I have a dispute about that. Part of me wants to be buried next to me, and she wants our children to be able to come all the time. For me, that's a good reason to be buried here, so my children and grandchildren will come all the time. But I suspect I'm going to end up somewhere in Queens.
Well, as an Allah Kadasha, I can tell you, there's always 1,000 reasons not to, but when you're ready, we will take you.
I used to, we have a site on Martha's Vineyard where we've spent 50 years to be buried, but I think they would exclude me now. The Martha's Vineyard radical leftists would not want me to be buried. It would be unsacred burial for me. Somebody who defended President Trump to be buried in Chilmartin, forget about it.
Thank you so much, President Dershowitz.
All right. Now, finally, we're going to open the floor to questions. We have a couple of volunteers. I cannot really see anybody, so where are you guys?
Thank you.
Right here. Oh, okay, here's Shanna, and who else? There are 2 more guys. Okay, all right, guys, look around, see them. We have Bennett and Ezra. Can you guys know your names? For those of you, okay? They're over there. And Chen over here, okay? Now, if you guys have a question, they're going to come up to you. They're going to get that question. Please remember to be respectful and to not give us a half an hour question. Something short, concise, to the point. Because, questions don't state.
Before the questions, can I just make a brief comment? I just learned that we are mishpacha. That his great-grandfather or grandfather was married to my grandmother. They were both widows, widowers. My grandmother was about, 85, and your grandfather
Your mother and my grandmother are best friends.
Best friends.
Right.
And they used to hang out together in Florida.
Right.
And what a thrill to be with a Brody. I grew up with the Brody family. I thought the only related to him.
No. Same accent.
Israel, right?
It has your jump shot.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So let's get our first question. Chen, do you want to choose somebody? And introduce yourself. Say where you're from.
Hello, my name is Gabriel Trove. I was born in South Africa and most of my life lived here in Israel. First thing I would like to thank you very much. I use your book all over the world when I've done Israel advocacy.
Oh, thank you.
I'm so grateful for you. I would like to ask you, I'm just studying for the bar exam. I studied law and government at AC, and my professor, Alan Dershowitz, he always says that the Israeli system is very flawed. Our political system doesn't work. It's focused much more on representation than stability. So I would like to ask you, what would be a better political system in Israel, and how would we actually achieve it?
Well, first of all, you are the luckiest law student in the world to have Amnon Rubenstein as your professor. He is one of the greatest legal scholars, legal minds in the history of Israel. As you know, he was the dean of the Tel Aviv University Law School. He was then the dean at the IDC, one of the founders of Meretz, an amazing, amazing man who I count as a friend, and please, when you see him, send him my very best. I think every political system has to be grown indigenously from the ground up. When Eastern Europe broke off from the Soviet Union, I got a number of phone calls from government officials asking me to help write constitutions for the newly liberated Soviet puppet states. And I turned them down. I said, you need to have scholars from your country who understand your country, who understand your culture, who understand traditions, to write those constitutions. I'm happy, but you shouldn't be exporting constitution writing or the political system writing. Look, if you had asked me that question 70 years ago, I would have said, create a written constitution. But you can't do that now. The United States couldn't ever adopt a constitution today. The only way constitutions can ever be adopted is before political parties form. George Washington understood that. He opposed political parties. And because you all know, sure many of you know the writing of John Rawls, the great legal philosopher, who basically proposed a fancy variation of the shoe on the other foot test. And that is, the only way to know what's moral is to not know what place you have in the world. So his idea of creating a fair legal and a fair political system is to imagine yourself in a netherworld before you were born. You're smart, but you don't know whether you'll be a man or a woman. You don't know whether you'll be black or white. You don't know whether you'll be gay or straight. You don't know whether you'll be Jewish, Christian, Muslim, or atheist. You don't know any of those things. You don't know whether you'll be healthy or sick. And draft a system where you don't know who you'll be. The fallacy with that approach, of course, is you know you're going to be smart. Otherwise, you wouldn't be asked to do that. And that already gives you a tremendous bias because most of the world isn't that smart. And so you have to ask yourself what a fair system would look like. The Israeli system has succeeded in many ways. It's succeeded in promoting democracy and preventing tyranny, which is the basic and most fundamental policy of any government. The United States government, with its system of checks and balances, is extraordinarily inefficient. It was never intended to be efficient. It's also not democratic. It's a republic. 2 senators from each state, which means Nevada gets as many senators as California. Electoral college, which I've been teaching for 55 years and still don't understand. And many other policies that are not democratic, but it was indigenous. It grew out of the institution of slavery, the fact that we're a federal system with large and small states. So the one thing, my dearest friend in Israel, who I've known since 1967, is Aaron Barak, and one of the most wonderful legal scholar minds in the world. But whenever Aaron used to borrow opinions of the United States Supreme Court, I would write him a little note and say, you know, good for America, maybe not exactly right for Israel. So, you know, you're going to have to create your own political system. There have been some improvements. Look, the number of votes that qualify for membership in the Knesset has gone up, which is a very good thing. Maybe it should go up more. Maybe you should move closer to a 2 or 3 or 4 party system. But I don't know whether that suits the Israeli character, the Israeli personality. Look, mostly keep doing what you're doing. You don't measure success and failure by the fact that you may have to have 4 or 5 or 6 elections this time. You have to look at it over time. And over time, Israel has been one of the most successful democracies in the history of the world.
So I'm unfortunately cutting out, guys, because we actually have a live election broadcast starting at 9:45 p.m. At 10 p.m. people will start coming in. So you guys will be watching that. MJ's going to take over for me.
Okay.
Thank you everybody
Round of
so
applause
much for being
for
here.
Natasha.
I have to tell you, when this terrific woman was the moderator of my show, it was unbelievable. She asked all the best questions. She was right on target, and you were just great. And thank you for your questions tonight.
So we're going to go to our next question. We think our volunteers can head to the back so we don't over bias the front. Who's got the mic? Can you pick somebody? Whoever's got the mic.